The beauty of a retreat is in one's ability to open up to God, who speaks in the depths of one's heart. And as we said in the afternoon, it is of utmost importance to enter into silence, and beyond silence to go into the stillness of the heart, where we allow all the faculties to, as it were, go into a sleep. The memory, the mind, the heart, and focus on one thing and one thing only, that God is here. And so, despite the many difficulties in connectivity that we faced this afternoon, which perhaps was a good introduction to the life of St. Joseph, walking in the ashes of one's life and facing the troubled waters as he did, we could only have begun with such disturbances and yet never allow them to take us away from God. Because life is like that. You will see that you are not connecting with your spouse. You are not connecting with your child. You are not connecting with your friends. You are not even connecting with yourself. And yet, that is not the call to suicide. Therefore, I am good for nothing. We look at ourselves and we ask ourselves, what's wrong? How could I do things better? And perhaps at this time, we want to learn from St. Joseph that in all these difficulties, he did not give up. In all these painful experiences, he remained resolute. That he allowed his encounter with God deep inside his heart to then nourish his external experiences. He therefore was not afraid as long as he entered deep inside. Fear is taken away by the encounter with the living God. And then we are free to live, free to fly, free to be. Perhaps you have started that journey, which Dag Hammarskjöld, the first United Nations Secretary General, said was the longest journey. He says the longest journey, Dag Hammarskjöld says, is the journey within. And perhaps you have started, and it begins with a few little steps, a few attempts to be silent, a few attempts to be still, to pay attention in our silence. For the Holy One is here. And allow him to begin to talk to us, to begin to touch us, to begin to move us, to begin to draw us into his presence and fill us with his love and heal our wounded hearts and drive away those things that perhaps are done inside of us. Has anyone had any experience of a bit of silence, of prayer that took place today that maybe they would want to share a little for the edification of others. And so I leave this time to a bit of sharing of our experience as we began. I know you went on the Rosary Walk and tried to focus on that prayer. Perhaps you got a bit of time to go into silence. Or is there any experience that you would like to talk about as we begin our retreat today? I leave it to one of one moderator there to perhaps pick those who have experiences to share. Thank you. I will come back and talk later. Let me perhaps begin by thanking you for sharing, because each time we share like this, it gives us the opportunity to know where each other is, and perhaps to journey with the other person and silently encourage each other to enter into this moment of encounter with the Lord. I liked the question that was posed by one of us. How can I be silent when I am among people? It seems like a very simple question, but it's a question that perhaps was asked at the very beginning of the desert tradition, where men and women who found life too noisy, who found prayer in the context of a crowd impossible, ran away. And we speak about this as having taken place at the very beginning in Egypt. And one of those early men who ran away into the desert to pray on his own and to be silent is called Saint Anthony of Egypt. He is one of the desert fathers. Perhaps the question underlying his departure was, I have to be away from it all, from people, from things, from noise, and I have to be alone. But also note that these desert fathers and mothers, men and women who went into the desert to pray on their own, slowly began to form what they call cenobic communities, where they would come together to pray, to break the bread of the word, to give each other encouragement and spiritual direction, and then go away and pray on their own, but have time to come together. That was the birth of monastic life, where people come together and live together, and yet are able to be silent. And so it is possible to be silent in the midst of people. When you look at this whole monastic tradition that perhaps was highlighted by Saint Benedict, because he is the man who drew the monastic life to the towns, when he says we want to bring the desert into the cities, and he founded monasteries in towns, he probably was saying also, it's possible to be silent, to pray in the midst of company. It's possible to be still in the midst of noise. And so it's important to know that what one of us was asking was a question that perhaps drew people into the desert until they realized that the problem is not with who is around me. The problem is inside me. And so, having understood that, I can go into the city. I can be in my house and still be able to be silent in the midst of the noise created by my children, noise created by my husband, noise created by so many things, the trains that pass, the buses, the commotion of city life. We can still be silent. Now, I want you to look at St. Joseph. If he is our great example of what it means to be silent, then let's understand that Joseph was not silent away from people. He was a father of a house and of a home. He was a member of a community. He was known as the carpenter, and Jesus was known as the carpenter's son. He lived within the context of the hustle and bustle of ordinary life. And yet he spoke very little. He was able to be silent and to be still. And even in that context, he was able to encounter God and to through his silence, to offer himself to the God who came to him in his silence. And so what perhaps for me is important is that we can be silent in the midst of noise. And it takes a deeper appreciation of this kind of silence as not the seizure of the noise that is being generated outside, but the seizure of the noise that is being generated inside, where we are unable to be still deep inside us. We certainly will not be able to be silent even when our mouths are shut. It's inside. I am perhaps a very keen follower of John Bradbury. I am intoxicated always by his contemplative dimension within the context of Mutemwa. It's important to see this man as the man who perhaps personifies Joseph in the sense of being able to contemplate God, being able to nourish his heart with silence as he worked, as he served, as he washed those with leprosy, as he took care of them. In that context of service, of a busy day, in that context of noise, he was able to be still. He was able to be silent. And when perhaps you didn't get time to reflect on his words, God's love within your heart is your native land. It's important to take those words in. Live in your heart. That's where it happens. That's where God is lighting a fire. That's where the encounter takes place. It's in the heart. It's when we are still. It's when we are open to that God who dwells inside of us, that we are able to meet him and to encounter him in silence. I see tomorrow's program as beginning at 7 with some quiet time. Some of us might want to wake up earlier if the rules of your retreat place allows. Find a place. Be still. Just say, as one of our great saints would used to say, God, I am here. And he would just be quiet. This is John Vianney. He would go into the chapel and simply say, I am here. And that was his prayer. Oh, prayer was just being there. When I was listening to the reflections, I appreciated very much the thinking bit that was coming through. Many of you were talking about reflecting, thinking about things, thinking things through, even in spiritual things. It's a stage in your life when the mind is busy, when you are taking things and breaking them down and arriving at a conclusion. It's what meditation is all about. But slowly and surely, God takes you from the mind to the heart and begins to help you to silence the faculties, to silence this mind, to silence the noise that comes through your memory, to silence the worries that you carry, and you are just honed on God, where he just wants you to be still. Prayer at the end of the day is not all about saying things quietly. That's not what we are talking about when we are talking about silence here, where you are not talking to anybody, but where inside you are busy saying things to God. We are even saying, say nothing to God. Let your prayer just be a presence. The Vianney prayer, I am here. The John Bradburn disposition of just being in your native land. This, if it happens, will be a breakthrough. For the first time, you will see that it's not about what we say to God. It's about being in his presence and waiting for him. He might not come at the time when we expect him, but grow that sense of waiting, that sense of being there, that is born out of silence and stillness. And one day he will surprise you. One day in your own heart that feels so dry and so empty, it will rain. One day God comes pouring in. And for the first time you realize it's been worth the wait. I am sad that I'm not there. It would have been nice to see you, perhaps to hold your hand, perhaps to see your tears, perhaps to walk up and down and pray the rosary together. Unfortunately, things being what they are, it was not easy to come out and be there because of the various restrictions that are there. Maybe in the coming year it will be possible. But it's not my presence that will either make the retreat better or best. It's how you take this time, throwing yourself into the arms of silence and into the presence of God. And so I stop there. I can go on. My invitation, as we started today, is try and enter into silence. Remember the words of that great monk. He says, the great truth that the Holy Spirit utters in the depths of the soul, unspeakable groanings, is that the infinite God is present here. Pray for that. Let me become aware in my silence of the infinite God present here. And so we leave it there and give you perhaps time to be quiet in your own rooms and to reflect deeply about this moment and about what God is wanting in and through the silence, not only of your mouth, but of your inner faculties, so that you can be totally available for God. Thank you again. Perhaps we will ask someone to give us a closing prayer.
Yourself. Yosefu